The neighborhood was a tranquil suburbia where maple trees lined the streets like soldiers guarding a secret. Their leaves a riot of autumn colors scattered across the ground and crunched underfoot like forgotten memories. The air was full of the rich scent of the season, crisp, with a hint of wood smoke from distant fireplaces. It was an ordinary place filled with ordinary people living ordinary lives. That is until Karen moved in. Karen was a force of nature, a whirlwind in overpriced golf attire, a clipboard clutched like a scepter. Her domain was the homeowners association, and her word was law. She prowled the neighborhood's well-manicured lawns with a hawk's gaze, spotting the smallest infractions and reveling in the power she wielded over the residents. Her presence was as unavoidable as it was unwelcome. The first act of petty tyranny came not long after her arrival. A neatly folded note appeared in my mailbox, as crisp as her demeanor. It was a reminder. Know a decree my mailbox was a quarter-inch too high. I chuckled at the absurdity, imagining her measuring tape held with the same fervor as a knight wields a sword. I adjusted it more to keep peace than out of any obligation. It wasn't worth the effort to resist yet. Day by day, her demands grew more ridiculous, each one a testament to her pettiness. Painting my door an approved shade of beige, a color so dull it seemed to suck the life out of the street. Ensuring my garbage cans were aligned with military precision at the curb. Each task, another stitch in the tapestry of control she wove over us all. But amidst the minor annoyances, life remained bearable. My haven was my backyard, a small sanctuary where my dog Max and I found solace. Max, a golden retriever with a heart as big as his appetite, was my loyal companion. His bark was a song of joy, his eyes pools of unconditional love. Yet this simple pleasure was soon tainted by Karen's shadow. A new note arrived laced with venom. It accused Max of barking too loudly, disrupting the peace she claimed to uphold. The irony was almost laughable. The neighborhood had never been quieter than since her arrival, voices hushed in fear of her wrath. Still I complied out of courtesy and quiet defiance masked as acquiescence. I trained Max to bark, only when necessary, his boisterous nature subdued to a mere echo. Peace was a fragile thing, easily shattered. One morning, as sunlight filtered through the trees, I glanced out the window to see Karen standing on the sidewalk, a canister of pepper spray gripped tightly in her hand. Her eyes were locked on Max, her intent clearer than the morning sky. A spark of defiance flared within me, hot and unyielding. She had crossed a line drawn in the sand of decency. It was time to act, but not with the same pettiness she wielded so freely. The police were called with all the calm deliberation of a general planning a campaign. Her facade of righteousness faltered as they approached, the spray slipping from her fingers like a shattered illusion. There was power in patience, in measured response. The wheels of justice turned slowly but inexorably. As the officers spoke with her, her indignation gave way to the realization of consequences, the first cracks in her carefully constructed world. The charge was filed, not merely a punishment, but a stand against her tyranny. I watched from a distance, my heart steady, the weight of repression lifting, as the neighborhood began to breathe once more. In the golden light of late afternoon, I looked down at Max, his tail wagging, oblivious to the drama unfolding around him. He nudged my hand with his nose, a reminder of the simple joys that endured. As we turned to retreat into the house, the leaves rustled softly, whispering promises of change. A sign, perhaps, that even the most stubborn seasons must eventually yield. I watched Karen walk away, her spine as rigid as the rules she clung to. The memory of her threat against Max lingered like the bitter aftertaste of overbrewed coffee. I stroked Max's fur, his tail wagging lazily, unaware of the storm brewing around him. It wasn't just a matter of letting it slip into oblivion. No. This was the kind of slight that demanded a response, like a pebble thrown in a pond rippling outward. It started with letters, neatly typed, adorned with the smug insignia of our homeowners association. The first was a notice about Max's unauthorized presence. He had lived here longer than most of the tulips in Karen's yard yet. Here we were. The missive was as cold as last winter's snow, a calculated salvo in her escalating campaign. Then came the rules. Absurd in their specificity, lawns could not exceed precisely 2 inches in height. Porch lights off by 9 p.m., sharp trash cans out only between 6 and 7 a.m. on collection days. Each was an exercise in minutia, a web of regulations spun tighter than a spider's silk. Karen's handiwork, undoubtedly the ink still wet with her intent. It was the citations that followed petty infractions dressed in the guise of official governance. Max's paw prints on the sidewalk were deemed a nuisance, a forgotten rake labeled a hazardous obstruction. These were not rules. They were Karen's weapons wielded with the precision of a scalpel, but with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. The neighborhood became a theater of whispers. Hushed voices carried tales of my supposed defiance, a rebellion against the sacred doctrines of our HOA. Karen's narrative twisted like vines, wrapping itself around the ears and opinions of our neighbors. Her words, insidious as ivy, claimed I was the dissenter, the one who couldn't abide by the simple tenets of our community. It wasn't just gossip. It was an artful campaign of character, assassination. Mornings were tinged with the sharpness of stares. Nods once amiable turned curt. Karen's influence spread like ink in water, seeping into the interactions that once painted my days with familiarity. I felt it in the way Mrs. Jenkins avoided me, her eyes flitting away as if my glance held contagion. Saw it in the way Mr. Carter suddenly remembered an appointment whenever I approached. Yet beneath the surface of this orchestrated facade lay a quiet power. I felt it in the deliberate calm I maintained in the unyielding gaze I met her with across community meetings. Karen may have had her rules, her citations, and her gossip, but I had something infinitely more resilient: truth, and the quiet dignity of knowing it. Max and I continued our walks, each step a declaration of defiance, each wag of his tail a testament to a life lived without fear. I refused to bend under the weight of Karen's tyranny. My resolve was a fortress ironclad and unyielding. Her storm may have gathered, but it was within my power to choose how or if it touched me. In the end, it wasn't just about rules or dogs. It was about standing firm in the tempest, knowing that even the fiercest storm eventually breaks. And when it does, it leaves the sky clearer than it ever was before. The sun hung low, casting long shadows across the perfectly manicured lawns of our neighborhood. The scene was almost cinematic, a suburban utopia, hiding its cracks beneath a veneer of green. My mind, however, was anything but peaceful. I sat in the kitchen sipping lukewarm coffee, staring at the stack of documents I had compiled. Each sheet was a testament to my quiet determination, a meticulous record of the events that led to this moment. It began with an innocuous parking ticket, a small yellow slip tucked under my windshield wiper. The offense was minor, a mere technicality, but it was enough to spark my curiosity. I began to document every interaction with Karen, the self-appointed enforcer of our homeowners association. Rules her threats were thinly veiled behind a saccharine smile, her words as sharp as the teeth of the paper shredder I used to dispose of her passive-aggressive letters. The day she threatened Max My loyal golden retriever with pepper spray. Something shifted. Her words echoed in my mind, a discordant tune that refused to fade. I knew I had to act, not out of vengeance, but justice. Not just for Max, but for every resident who'd been under her overbearing thumb. I collected evidence like a detective in a noir film, each piece fitting into a puzzle of entitlement and audacity, emails, letters, even a video of her lurking near my yard, eyes narrowed in judgment. The neighbors, once silent, began to whisper their hushed voices, carrying tales of similar encounters. An elderly couple, too intimidated to speak out, handed me a letter they received 2 years ago. The pattern was undeniable. With everything documented, I contacted the police. My calm exterior belied the turmoil within as I explained the situation. Karen's threats were more than idle words. They were a violation of peace, a breach of trust. The officer listened, nodding at intervals. His face a mask of professional detachment. But his eyes told a different story. A flicker of recognition, perhaps, even understanding. The sun dipped further, casting an orange glow as I paced the living room waiting for the inevitable. The knock on the door was both a relief and a release. The officer stood there, his presence a quiet reassurance in this tangled web of suburban politicking. I handed over the documents, each page a silent testimony. The confrontation was not as dramatic as one might envision. Karen's face, usually so composed, fell into a mask of disbelief when she saw the officer approach her property. From my window, I watched her gestures, her voice rising in protest, though the words were lost to the distance. Her defiance was tempered by the officer's steady demeanor. It was a dance of authority and desperation. As the evening deepened, I sat on my porch, Max at my feet, watching as Karen's house grew darker, the porch light flickering on like a solitary eye in the gathering dusk. A small victory, perhaps, but one that resonated deep within the fabric of our community. Justice, it seemed, was a subtle force, not a roar, but a whisper. It was the quiet satisfaction of knowing that for once the balance had tipped toward the fair and the just. And as the night settled over our neighborhood, my resolve felt as solid as the ground beneath me, a testament to the power of quiet persistence in the face of looming shadows. The morning after Karen's arrest dawned with a serene clarity. The kind of morning where the sun seems to stretch its arms wide, embracing the world with a warm golden glow. But beneath the sky's calm facade, the neighborhood simmered with whispers and speculation. As I sipped my coffee on the porch, I noticed how the clouds ambled lazily across the azure canvas, mirroring the slow unfolding drama below. Neighbors, once blind to Karen's reign of terror, began to notice the ripples. Conversations were hushed eyes, wary like those of a skittish deer in a clearing. The mailman, Mr. Jenkins, approached with caution, his routine as methodical as the ticking of a clock. Today, though, his steps faltered as he neared Karen's house, his gaze lingering on the taped-off path leading to her door. Curious eyes peeked from behind curtains, their silent questions filling the air with an unspoken tension. Karen's absence was palpable. It was as if someone had removed a central piece from a complex puzzle, leaving jagged edges that didn't quite fit together anymore. The neighborhood felt different, lighter, yet charged with unspent energy. I took my dog Max for a walk, our usual route winding through the heart of suburbia. Max, oblivious to human dramas, trotted happily beside me. His tail a metronome of bliss, I envied his innocence. The path took us past Mrs. Thompson's garden, a riot of colors struggling to break free from winter's grasp. Her nod was curt, her eyes asking questions, her lips dared not voice. It was then I realized how much Karen had been the sun around which our little community orbited, not with warmth, but with an overbearing presence that dictated the tides of daily life. Without her, people were coming into their own, reclaiming spaces and voices that had been overshadowed. I reached the park, a small oasis, where the city's cacophony dwindled into whispers. Here parents watched children play their laughter, a balm on the neighborhood's frayed nerves. I found a bench, let the world settle around me. Max lay at my feet, content. A shadow stretched across the grass, drawing my attention. Mrs. Chen, always the diplomat, stood a few paces away. Her smile was tentative, like the first green shoot of spring. She sat, leaving a careful distance, her presence anchoring an unspoken camaraderie. There had been a time when Mrs. Chen and Karen were thick as thieves partners in the HOA's draconian decisions. I wondered what she thought now with the queen bee toppled from her throne. Shame about Karen. She finally murmured her words, a soft echo against the rustling leaves. It was a statement, not a sentiment. Her eyes met mine, searching perhaps for confirmation of a shared perspective. I nodded. Words unnecessary. The irony was not lost on me. Karen had built walls around herself to control, to dominate. Yet in her absence, those walls were crumbling, revealing a community that could stand without her shadow looming large. As I walked home, the air felt different, lighter. The neighborhood was like an old ship on new waters adjusting course. Karen's threat had been the catalyst, but it was the community's response that defined the future. Sometimes change is forced upon us. It begins with one moment, one decision, like a single drop, causing ripples across a pond. I had made my choice, and the ripples were still spreading, reaching further than I had ever anticipated. In the end, it was not Karen's actions that defined her legacy, but the way we chose to move forward. And as I closed my front door behind Max and me, I felt a quiet power in that realization. A new chapter was beginning, not just for me, but for all of us. The room was cold, not in temperature but in essence. The stark white walls of the local magistrate's office stood impassively, a silent witness to the grind of bureaucracy. Papers, shuffled pens, scratched, and yet there was an eerie calm that settled over me as I sat there clutching the folder of evidence against Karen. I glanced at the clock, its hands creeping forward in indifference. My mind wandered back to that day, Karen's face twisted in righteous fury, the small canister of pepper spray clutched in her hand like a weapon of war. My dog Max had cowered low, his tail tucked in submission to a threat that should never have been. Her voice, shrill and cutting, had echoed in the quiet suburban street, a siren of discord. I had always thought of our neighborhood as a canvas of calm, painted with the muted tones of routine and order. But Karen had splashed crimson chaos across it, a self-appointed sentinel of the homeowners association. Her vendetta against Max and me was as relentless as the tides crashing against the shores of my patience. My fingers traced the edge of the folder. Inside were the printouts of her venomous emails, demands masquerading as suggestions, evidence of her harassment, veiled threats, and finally the sworn testimonies of neighbors who had witnessed her actions that day. I had constructed it with care, a meticulous piece of quiet rebellion. The door opened, breaking my reverie. The magistrate, a stoic figure with kind eyes, skimmed through the file. Time stretched an elastic band of anxiety that threatened to snap, but beneath the surface my resolve was an iron anchor. I didn't need shouting matches or public tirades. I had the truth, and it was far mightier than Karen's arsenal of petty grievances. His expression didn't change much as he read on, but a subtle nod indicated he saw what I did. The irony was almost poetic. Karen, the self-proclaimed guardian of order, now potentially facing charges for disorderly conduct, a small ironic justice in the grand scheme of things. Finally, he looked up, a measured glance that met mine with a weight of understanding. The silence in the room shifted a pregnant pause before the gavel of justice. I didn't need him to speak, to know that he saw the merit in my case. Sometimes, justice spoke most eloquently with its quiet assurance. The air outside felt different on my skin as I left the building, a gentle breeze carrying away the heaviness of the past few weeks. I considered the irony. Karen, who had aimed to enforce peace through intimidation, would now face the very structure she claimed to uphold. The police would handle it from here, and the weight of their investigation would be her wake-up call. At home, Max greeted me with a wagging tail and eyes full of unconditional trust. The sun dipped low in the sky, painting our street with a golden hue of forgiveness. The neighborhood seemed quieter, as if holding its breath in anticipation of what came next. I realized then that the victory was not just in the authorities acknowledging her faults, but in reclaiming my peace. It was in knowing that my quiet resistance spoke louder than her threats ever could. Max trotted beside me as we walked down the street, the shadows growing long around us. The path ahead was clear, unburdened by fear or anger. Just a gentle stroll beneath the canopy of evening, a reminder that true strength often lay in the quietest of defiance. The tension in the neighborhood hung thick like fog, refusing to dissipate even as the sun rose on a day that promised renewal. It felt as though we were all actors in a play penned by the whims of a tyrant, her lines a cacophony of demands, judgments, and at times absurdity. But today marked the beginning of the final act. I walked my usual path with Rufus, the reassuring patter of his paws on the sidewalk, a comforting rhythm. The air was crisp, the kind that filled your lungs with clarity and purpose. Each step seemed to pulse with the promise of change. The mailboxes stood like sentinels, silent witnesses to the unfolding drama of suburban life. Karen had been oddly quiet since the police incident. The community buzzed with theories about her next move, whispers like leaves rustling in a gentle breeze. Some speculated she would double down, while others hoped she'd retreat into the shadows of her own making. I knew better than to predict the path of a storm. Sometimes the eye passed over, leaving a deceptive calm. The morning's mailbox offerings were more than bills and flyers. They held the culmination of our shared discontent. A petition quietly circulated. Since that fateful afternoon, now bore the signatures of nearly every resident. It called for a vote to remove Karen from her self-appointed throne. The paper felt heavy in my hands, the ink a testament to our collective resilience. At the heart of our little rebellion was more than just a desire to dethrone a tyrant. It was a need to reclaim our community, restore the balance that had been upended by pepper spray threats and petty crusades against imagined infractions. We were done being pawns in her game. That evening, the community hall brimmed with a quiet, tentative hope. Faces familiar yet resolute turned towards the future, a tapestry of determination and shared history. We convened not for confrontation, but for catharsis, to speak our truths and find a path forward. Karen stood at the back, a statue carved from denial and disbelief. Her eyes swept the room, defiant, yet tinged with an uncertain vulnerability. It was as if she was really seeing the community for the first time, not as subjects to be ruled, but as individuals with voices, desires, and collective power. As the vote commenced, a profound silence descended, punctuated only by the soft shuffling of paper. My gaze drifted to Rufus, lying placidly at my feet, oblivious to the human theatrics. He was a constant, a reminder of the simple joys that Karen's reign had nearly overshadowed. The results were swift, the outcome inevitable. Karen, brilliant in her silence, retreated with a dignity that surprised us all. Perhaps she'd found solace in the quiet corner of her own making, Or maybe she was already plotting her return, a new strategy brewing beneath that carefully crafted exterior. With Karen sidelined, there was no grand celebration, no dramatic declaration of victory, just a collective exhale, a release of tension that had held us captive for too long. We dispersed into the night, carrying the weight of our choices, the clarity of a fresh start. The neighborhood felt different now, lighter somehow, as if the very air had been cleansed of its suffocating undertones. We were simply neighbors again, bound not by conflict but by a renewed sense of community. I walked home with Rufus, the stars twinkling above like a constellation of possibilities. The path ahead was ours to forge, unencumbered by the shadows of the past. And as the night folded around us, I realized that this was not just the end of Karen's reign, but the beginning of something beautiful,